I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of voices coming from the living room. My eyes opened slowly, still heavy with sleep, until I recognized one of the voices. It was Evan, my husband. His tone was calm, almost too calm. There was another man with him. His voice was deep and rough, one I had never heard before. I lay still, trying to make out what they were saying. At first, I thought maybe it was a friend or someone from work. But then I heard a sentence that froze me completely. Make it look like an accident. The words hit me like ice water. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe too loudly, afraid the smallest sound would give me away. Their voices were low, but the house was so quiet that I could hear enough. They were talking about a hiking trip. The cliff edge. How she won't see me coming. My heart pounded so hard I thought they might hear it from down the hall. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from making a sound. Every part of me wanted to run, but my body felt locked in place. There was a faint shuffle of papers. Then I heard something slide across the coffee table. An envelope. I knew that sound. The stranger spoke again. You sure you want it done this weekend? Evan didn't hesitate. It's perfect. I stared up at the ceiling in the darkness, my mind racing but my body frozen. I listened to every word, burning them into my memory. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. They talked about timing, making sure no one else would be around, and how it needed to look like a simple accident. Finally, I heard the scrape of a chair and footsteps heading toward the front door. It opened, then closed. Silence. A moment later, I heard Evan's footsteps in the hallway, slow and steady, coming closer. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. I quickly shut my eyes and forced my body to relax, pretending to be asleep. The bedroom door creaked open. Evan stepped inside. I felt the bed shift slightly as he sat down for a moment, then lay beside me. His breathing was slow and steady, as if nothing had happened. I kept my eyes shut, my breathing even, and waited. I couldn't let him know I had heard a single word. I lay there for the rest of the night, not sleeping, barely moving. My mind kept replaying the same conversation over and over. Evan had just paid a man to kill me, and he was sleeping right next to me. By the time the first light of morning crept into the room, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let him get to the weekend. I had to disappear first. The sunlight was already slipping through the blinds when I finally sat up. It felt wrong, like the light didn't belong here anymore. Outside, cars passed, birds sang, and the world kept moving as if nothing had happened. But my world felt cracked in two. I heard movement in the kitchen. The faint clink of a knife on a plate, the hum of the fridge door closing. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to get up, brush my hair, and walk in like I hadn't heard a thing last night. Evan sat at the table, eating breakfast. He looked up and smiled like everything was normal. I smiled back, though it felt like my face might break if I held it too long. I sat down across from him, keeping my hands wrapped around a coffee cup to hide their shaking. He spread jam on his toast, his hands steady and casual. I couldn't stop staring at them, thinking about what they had done last night. Just hours ago, those same hands had passed an envelope to a man who promised to end my life. He bit into the toast and looked at me with a grin. You must have slept like the dead last night, he joked. My throat closed. I forced out a small laugh, hoping he didn't notice how it caught halfway. I sipped my coffee, my eyes fixed on the table, so I wouldn't have to meet his. We made small talk, the kind of safe, meaningless words you say to fill silence. He mentioned work, the weather, something about needing to get the oil changed in the car. I nodded and agreed, barely hearing him. When he finally got up and grabbed his keys, I felt my chest loosen just a little. See you later, he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. I held still, trying not to flinch. The front door shut, and I stayed frozen until I heard his car pull away. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. I walked into the living room slowly, my eyes scanning every detail. There were 2 coffee mugs on the table. One of them had a faint lipstick smudge. It could have been old, but my stomach still tightened at the sight. I ran my fingers over the coffee table. There was a clean line in the thin layer of dust, a perfect rectangle where the envelope must have been. The couch cushions still carried the shape of someone sitting there. I pressed my hand into the dent, imagining Troy leaning forward, his low voice filling this space while I lay just down the hall. I turned to the small security camera in the corner. My phone should have been buzzing with alerts last night, but there had been nothing. I opened the app and checked the feed. Every recording from last night was gone, deleted. My hands felt cold as I scrolled. It wasn't just missing. The camera had been switched off for hours. Evan had turned it off before Troy even arrived. That meant he'd planned for me never to know they were here. And if I hadn't woken up, I might never have known at all. I knew that if I went to anyone with only my word, they might smile politely, say they were sorry I felt unsafe, and send me home. Without real proof, Evan could twist the story, make me look crazy. He could charm his way out of it. I needed something solid, something no one could argue with. The next afternoon, while Evan was still at work, I walked to a small electronics store 3 blocks away. My hands were sweating the whole time, and I kept checking over my shoulder, but no one followed. I bought a small, cheap voice recorder, the kind that could fit in my palm. I paid cash and stuffed it deep in my bag before heading back. Once home, I went straight to the living room. My fingers trembled as I pushed a stack of books forward just enough to wedge the recorder behind. It was hidden, but angled so the tiny microphone pointed toward the couch and coffee table. I pressed the record button and prayed it wouldn't die on me before I had what I needed. That night, Evan came home later than usual. He moved around the kitchen for a bit, then I heard the soft click of the front door opening again. Heavy boots stepped inside, and then a voice, that same low, rough tone from before. Troy. They settled into the living room, exactly like last time. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to their muffled conversation drift down the hall. The recorder was doing its job. I didn't move a muscle. I heard Troy's voice clearly this time. He was laughing. She's gonna go over the edge easy, right? Evan's voice followed, calm and certain. She trusts me completely. My stomach turned. They were talking about me like I was already gone. The conversation went on. More talk about the hiking trip, how early we'd start, where exactly they'd do it. Then the topic shifted to money. You'll get the other half after it's done, Evan said. I could almost picture him leaning back, relaxed, like they were discussing something as ordinary as fixing a leaky roof. I stayed still until I heard Troy's boots again, the front door closing, and Evan locking it. A few minutes later, his steps moved toward the bedroom. I shut my eyes and pretended to be asleep when he slipped into bed. When his breathing deepened, I waited another 10 minutes before sliding out as quietly as I could. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would wake him. In the living room, I reached behind the books and pulled out the recorder. My fingers were stiff and clumsy, but I managed to stop the recording and play it back. Every word came through clear. Troy's laugh, Evan's cold reply, the details of the plan, the payment. It was all there. I transferred the file to my laptop, then copied it onto 2 USB drives. One I slid deep into the lining of my purse, sewing the opening shut with quick, uneven stitches. The other I took the next morning to my friend Megan's house. I didn't tell her what it was, only asked her to keep it somewhere safe from me. Now, even if Evan found one copy, there would still be another. And for the first time in days, I felt like I had a tiny bit of power back in my hands. I called Megan the next morning, keeping my voice light, like I just wanted to catch up. She sounded happy to hear from me, and we agreed to meet at the park near her place. I didn't want to sit in a cafe or anywhere indoors where walls could have ears. Out in the open felt safer. The park was quiet, just a few people walking dogs or jogging by. I spotted her on a bench under a tree, waving as I came closer. She smiled at first, but the moment I sat down, I could feel the weight in my chest pressing forward. I tried to make small talk, but it felt forced. My words kept tangling, and finally, I just said it. I think Evan's trying to have me killed. Her smile faded instantly. What? I told her about waking up to his voice in the living room, about the other man, about what I'd heard. Her eyes grew wider with each detail, and when I pulled the small recorder from my purse, she leaned closer. I played just enough of the recording for her to hear Evan's voice and the man named Troy talking about me, going over the edge. When it stopped, she sat frozen for a moment, her mouth slightly open. Jesus, Anna, she whispered. Are you serious? I wish I wasn't. She shook her head, then grabbed my hand. You're not going back there. You can stay with me. I squeezed her hand but shook my head. Not yet. I need to know more. If I just disappear now, he might destroy the proof, or make it look like I'm running for no reason. I need to catch him with everything. Megan frowned, clearly unhappy with my answer. At least let me help. I know someone, an ex-cop who does private work now. His name's Sam. He's smart, and he doesn't scare easy. We spent the next half hour with me writing down everything I remembered, every detail from both nights, descriptions, exact phrases, times. I told her to keep it somewhere safe. If something happens to me, I said, give this to Sam. That seemed to hit her hard. She folded the paper carefully and slid it into her bag without another word. Before we left, we came up with a code phrase I could text her if I was in danger, but couldn't say it outright. It was something innocent enough that no one else would notice, but Megan would know to call for help immediately. We hugged before parting, and for a moment, I almost changed my mind about going home. But I didn't. Driving back, I kept checking my mirrors out of habit. That's when I saw it, a black SUV a few cars behind me. It stayed there when I turned right, then left, then right again. By the fourth turn, my stomach was knotted tight. And then, just like that, it was gone. I drove the rest of the way with my hands gripping the wheel so hard they ached, wondering if I'd imagined it, or if someone had just been making sure they knew exactly where I lived. I met Sam 2 days later, just like Megan had arranged. We picked a public garden near the center of town, somewhere busy enough to blend in but quiet enough to talk. To anyone passing by, we were just two friends catching up on a sunny afternoon. I sat on a bench with my bag on my lap, and Sam arrived a few minutes later. He was in his late 40s, tall with a weathered face and calm eyes that seemed to scan everything without looking like they were. We shook hands like old acquaintances. I slipped the small USB drive from my bag and passed it to him as casually as if I was handing over a stick of gum. "This has the recording," I said quietly. He plugged it into a small device he'd brought and listened with a pair of discreet earphones. His face didn't move much, but when I mentioned Troy's name, his eyes narrowed slightly. "I know that name," he murmured after pulling out the earbuds. "He's been around for years. Cash jobs only. Doesn't touch anything with an electronic trail. Careful enough that no one's nailed him yet." Hearing that made my stomach twist. This wasn't just some amateur my husband had found. This was someone who knew exactly how to make people disappear. "Don't go on that hike," Sam said firmly. "Not for any reason. You'd be walking right into it." "I'm not," I told him. "But I need enough evidence to take them both down. If it's just my word, or even the audio, they can still claim it's fake." Sam leaned back, thinking. "Then we get their faces, their voices, same time, same place." That night, after Evan left for work drinks with his co-workers, Sam came to my house. He had a small black camera, no bigger than a matchbox. He set it high on a bookshelf in the living room, angled perfectly toward the couch and coffee table. The lens was almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Once it was set, Sam slipped outside to wait in his car, watching the feed on his laptop. I pretended to be asleep in the bedroom, just like before. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to breathe evenly, listening for the door. Around 10, the low rumble of a man's voice carried down the hall. "Troy." He walked in like he'd been there 100 times, sitting in the exact same spot as before. I could hear him and Evan talking, not every word, but enough to know they were going over the plan again. The camera was catching everything. They stayed about 20 minutes, voices low and steady. When Troy finally left, Evan locked the door, then went to shower. I stayed still until Sam texted, "We got it." Later, watching the footage on Sam's laptop, I saw both of them clear as day. Evan's calm, smiling face as he spoke. Troy leaning forward, his voice matching perfectly with the audio I'd already recorded. Now it wasn't just my word. It wasn't just sound. We had them on camera, together, planning my death. The plan came together faster than I expected. Sam had already taken the footage and audio to a detective he trusted, and they agreed it was enough to set up a sting. The police wanted Evan caught in the act, his own words sealing it. I agreed to wear a wire. Just saying yes made my skin crawl, but it was the only way to make sure he couldn't talk his way out of it. They gave me a tiny microphone hidden inside my jacket and showed me how to touch the inside seam twice if I needed help immediately. Sam would be on the trail too, hidden somewhere with the police. The morning of the so-called hike, Evan was cheerful. Too cheerful. He carried the backpack, joked about how I'd better keep up. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to smile and match his pace. The trail wound higher, the air growing thinner, the sound of water rushing far below. When we reached a narrow stretch with a steep drop on one side, I stopped and glanced over the edge. My voice was light when I said, "So, this is where you do it." Evan smirked, not even hesitating. "Yeah, perfect spot." I laughed like it was a joke. "Make it look like I tripped?" He chuckled, slow and steady. "Exactly. That was when it happened. Movement from the rocks above us." Shouts. Police officers stepped out with weapons raised, ordering him to put his hands up. Evan's face drained of color. He stammered, trying to backpedal. "I don't cheese, this isn't." But the wire was still recording, every single word he'd just said. They had him on the ground in seconds, handcuffs snapping shut. Down the trail, another group of officers moved in on Troy, who had been waiting in town. He didn't fight, just stood there with that same flat expression I'd heard in his voice the first night. When they led me back, I climbed into the back of a patrol car. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grip my knees to keep them still. The world outside the window looked the same. Trees, sky, people walking their dogs. But for me, everything had shifted. I was alive, and they were going to prison. Evan's voice was almost unrecognizable when they dragged him to his feet. He was shouting, swearing, twisting in the officer's grip. "She's framing me. She set me up. This is all her." His eyes locked on mine for a second, and they were wild, desperate, and hateful at the same time. I didn't say a word. The police didn't either. They just kept walking him toward the cars. At the station, the detectives laid everything out on the table, literally. The audio recordings, the USB drives, the hidden camera footage, the wire from the hike. All of it lined up so neatly there wasn't room for doubt. It wasn't just my word anymore. It was his voice, his face, his agreement to have me killed. One detective leaned forward and told me something that made my stomach turn all over again. Evan had taken the envelope of cash meant for Troy and wiped my fingerprints onto it, planning to claim I'd been blackmailing him and Troy when the accident happened. In his head, I was supposed to die, and the evidence would paint me as the criminal. Troy's arrest opened up even more. The police found connections to other cases, suspicious deaths and disappearances stretching back years. It turned out I wasn't the first person he'd been paid to handle, though I might be the first who lived to talk about it. When the news broke, it was everywhere. Local stations ran the story on loop, and soon it was on national outlets too. Headlines about murder for hire gone wrong flashed on screens, and reporters camped outside my street hoping for a quote. I stayed inside. I wasn't going to be a headline for their entertainment. Megan was my shield. She kept people away, deleted the cruel messages that somehow found their way to my phone, and made sure I wasn't alone at night. Sam stepped in too, handling the detectives and lawyers when I felt too drained to keep talking. Between them, I could breathe without constantly watching the door. The prosecutor met with me a week later. She didn't sugarcoat it. I was the key witness. Without my testimony, the jury wouldn't hear the whole picture. Evan had refused every plea deal they'd offered, insisting he was innocent. That meant there would be a trial, and I'd have to sit in the same room as him again. Troy, on the other hand, didn't want to risk life in prison. He took a deal, decades behind bars in exchange for naming other clients and admitting to the plot against me. The prosecutor warned me that his testimony might make Evan even angrier, but it also made the case airtight. As the trial date was set, I could feel a strange mix of fear and determination building inside me. It wasn't over, not yet. I still had to face him. Still had to tell a room full of strangers what it felt like to hear your own husband pay for your death. But I wasn't running anymore. I'd survived the plan. Now I was going to make sure he didn't walk away from it. The trial stretched on for 3 long weeks. Every day felt heavier than the one before, but I showed up, sat in that courtroom, and looked straight ahead. When it was my turn, I took the stand and told them exactly what I had heard that night in the living room. I didn't rush. I repeated the words the way I remembered them, each one still sharp in my mind. The room was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. The prosecutors played the recordings next. First, the audio from the night I hid the recorder. Then the footage from the hidden camera. The jurors leaned forward, their faces tightening as Evan's voice filled the room. His tone was calm in the videos, almost casual, like he wasn't talking about ending a life at all. That seemed to disturb them even more. Then came a surprise. A woman walked in, and I realized it was someone I'd seen before but never spoken to. She turned out to be Evan's mistress. She testified that he had told her, "I'll be free soon," and that he was planning a trip to wrap things up. Her voice shook when she said it, but her words hit hard. I didn't look at Evan. I didn't need to. Closing arguments were brutal. The prosecutor painted the picture clearly: a husband planning his wife's death, laughing about it, paying for it, and then trying to frame her. The defense tried to twist it, but with the evidence, it sounded desperate. The jury went out, and for hours we waited. When they came back, I could barely breathe. The foreman stood and read the verdict: guilty on conspiracy to commit murder and solicitation. My knees felt weak, but I didn't cry. Evan just stared ahead, jaw clenched. A week later, the sentencing came. Evan got 28 years. Troy, who had already taken a plea, was given 22. Neither of them looked at me as they were led away. When it was finally over, I walked out of the courthouse into bright sunlight. It felt almost unreal. The case that had consumed every waking thought for months was finished. Outside, Sam and Megan were waiting. They didn't say anything at first, just wrapped their arms around me and held on tight. For the first time in what felt like forever, my chest loosened. I still had a long road ahead, but there was something there I hadn't felt in months. A small, fragile sense that maybe, just maybe, I was safe again. It had been a few weeks since the sentencing when the unease came creeping back. I was in the kitchen, sorting through the mail, when an unmarked envelope slid out from the stack. Inside was a single photo. It was of me, pushing a shopping cart in the grocery store last Tuesday. There was no note, no sender's name, nothing, just the image. My stomach went cold. Someone had been close enough to take it without me noticing. I called Sam right away. He came over and studied the photo, his jaw tightening. He took it with him, promising to trace where it came from. The next day, he told me the truth. It led back to Troy's younger brother. Apparently, he'd been seen hanging around town since the trial ended. The police moved quickly, putting a restraining order in place, but I knew it wasn't enough. A piece of paper wouldn't stop someone who already thought I'd ruined his family. That night, Sam sat at my table and suggested I move to a safe house the police could monitor. I didn't argue. By the end of the week, I was packed and gone. The safe house was small, tucked away on a quiet street. The police registered me under a temporary name, but even there, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak in the floorboards made me flinch. Every shadow outside the window made my heart race. Sam came by with boxes of security equipment, cameras, motion sensors, reinforced locks. He worked late into the night setting them all up. "You'll see everything before it sees you," he said, but I could hear the worry in his voice. A few nights later, the cameras caught something. A car drove past the safe house once, twice, then again an hour later. The fourth time, it slowed down. The headlights swept across the walls, and the driver's face was just visible in the grainy footage, Troy's brother. Sam sent the video straight to the police. They didn't waste time. 2 nights later, officers intercepted him driving by again. They arrested him on the spot for stalking and violating the restraining order. When the court date came, I had to testify again. I told them how I'd received the photo, how he'd driven past the safe house over and over. My voice stayed steady, even when his eyes followed me from the defendant's table. The judge sentenced him to jail, and I walked out knowing, at least for now, he couldn't reach me. But the whole thing left a mark. Even with him locked up, I could still feel the shadow of it all following me. I started thinking about leaving for good, not just the safe house, but the state. Somewhere far enough away that no one connected to Evan or Troy could ever accidentally run into me again. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself, but after everything, the idea of disappearing on my own terms didn't seem like running anymore. It seemed like survival. I moved to a small coastal town where no one knew my name. On paper, I was someone else entirely, with a clean history and no trace of what had happened. The place was quiet, with narrow streets and salt in the air. I rented a small storefront and turned it into a used bookstore. Most days, the sound of the ocean mixed with the soft rustle of pages as customers browsed. The USB drives with all the recordings and videos stayed locked away in a hidden safe behind a false wall in the back office. I never touched them, but I could never bring myself to get rid of them. They were my proof, my insurance, in case the past ever tried to claw its way back. Evenings were my favorite. I'd close the shop, walk down to the pier, and sit with a coffee, watching the waves roll in. I didn't go to crowded events or talk much to strangers. My life was small, but it felt steady, something I hadn't known in a long time. One morning, a headline caught my eye online. Evan had been attacked in prison. The article said he wasn't expected to survive his injuries. I read it twice, then closed the page. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel joy. What I felt was finality, like a door had been slammed shut for good. Weeks passed, and I started to let my guard down. I caught myself smiling at regular customers, even laughing once in a while. The air didn't feel as heavy. For the first time, I wondered if I was finally safe enough to stop looking over my shoulder. Then, one quiet afternoon, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered without thinking. There was silence at first. Not the kind from a bad connection, the kind where you can hear someone breathing on the other end. I said hello once, then again, each time my voice a little tighter. Finally, a low male voice broke the stillness. "You think it's over?" The line went dead. I sat completely still, the phone still pressed to my ear. The bookstore around me was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the ceiling fan. All the calm I'd built, all the safety I'd convinced myself I had, gone in a second. The waves outside still rolled in and out, steady and endless, but I no longer heard them. Do you think I made the right choice by disappearing before Evan could go through with his plan? Or should I have confronted him face to face? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. And if you want more twisted betrayal and revenge stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss one.